I'm not good enough to digest this new information, to take this on, to take on this new role as a part of my identity, or it doesn't align. It doesn't feel right for me, so I'm going to push it away instead of digesting it open-heartedly and letting it come out as it wants to. You know, it's like we digest everything we put in our mouth. Why don't we digest everything that we see? The hara is where we digest the fire in life. Drive, passion, purpose, identity. Welcome to Monday Movements. This week we're going to focus on the hara, the stomach, the single organ of our digestive tract that begins right after the esophagus. And so we have 3 key links that are associated with the stomach when it comes to psychosomatics, when it comes to the metaphysical components that can be related to stomach issues. We have number 1, grudge loops, number 2, superiority complexes, and number 3, control-driven worries. I'm going to break those all down so that we can see how it all kind of pieces together and how this can be related to anything that presents physically in the stomach, but what can be lying behind there when it comes to mental, emotional, beliefs, thoughts, feelings, experiences that we've had in this life. How can they be associated when we've got issues showing up in this particular area of the body? Let's go. So the stomach is the first major organ where we begin to digest food. Of course, we have the mouth and the esophagus, but this is our first major organ where the digestion really starts to happen, the breakdown of the food that we eat. And this organ does a massive job of breaking down, organizing all these other foods and deciding where they go. And when we think about the function of the stomach in that way, we can start to think about the psychosomatics and how it is mirrored in how we digest new information in life. I've talked about this previously in another video on psychosomatics, but when there is new information in life that we do not like, especially if this new information starts to stir feelings of imposter syndrome, a lack of understanding, or feeling inferior, then we tend to push it away. We tend to refuse it. Refuse to digest this new information. Confirmation bias can come in here as well, which is where if we don't agree with new information just because we simply don't understand it, or we feel like we're not smart enough to understand it, or we don't know enough to understand it, then we can push it away and look for another piece of evidence, another piece of new information to confirm what we already have an opinion on. And so when we start to suppress and push away all this new information, it kind of just stores there. Where does it go? It doesn't go anywhere. It remains there in the stomach. If you suppress it and don't deal with it, it remains there, sitting there, kind of festering in the background, contracted, stagnant, stuck in that one organ, until we decide it's time to do ourselves a favor and let go. So it's similar to how we store frustration and anger in the knees, but instead of frustration and anger, like what we store in the knees, in the stomach, we're storing stubbornness and superiority, an element of pride. And it makes sense because we have our solar plexus here, which is all about our identity and our confidence and our pride. Which brings me to key link number 2, superiority complex. This is where we have the opposing energy to that inferiority, that feeling of inferiority that we talked about in the previous key link. We have superiority and the superego coming in here. But this superiority complex, or this superego, is kind of a front. It's hiding what's sitting there stagnant, stirring in the stomach, which is that refusal to digest new information. If we refuse to digest new information simply because we don't understand it yet, or we feel like we're not good at it yet, whatever it may be, then it's left to fester there in the stomach, reminding us of that story that kept it there in the first place, that we are an imposter, that we are inferior for not knowing this new information yet, or for not fully agreeing with the information, the new information. It's got me thinking about this scene of The Lion King, where Simba is a young cub and he kind of arcs up and roars. This tiny little roar because he's a cub, but he roars in his attempts to establish superiority against the hyenas when he's facing a pack of hyenas. And underneath it, he was scared. He felt inferior. But on the outside, his superego was coming out. He was roaring. He was coming out super confident. And in this context, bringing the superego out to play, it can actually be a valuable survival strategy. But in the context of today's modern world, for most of us anyway, where being concerned by a pack of hyenas rarely happens, it's simply not necessary. Especially when you think about it this way, not knowing a piece of information because it's new, because it's unknown to us, is kind of the point. That's why it's new. We're so afraid of newness, but the whole point of newness is to not really know it yet, to not really fully understand it. And yet we sit there and we tell ourselves, oh my God, I'm so silly for not knowing this yet, or not being good at this yet, or not having picked it up fast enough yet. But that's the whole point of newness. Which brings me then to our last key link, control-driven worries. Because if we can overcome this last key link, we can overcome the grudge loops being stored in the stomach and therefore the superiority complexes that kind of happens as a result of the storage of those grudge loops, of not wanting to digest the new information. So I mentioned before that the stomach is connected to our solar plexus quite strongly. This energy center is where our core identity, our sense of purpose, and our drive stem from. If we have trouble digesting new information because we're worried about not knowing enough, not understanding it enough, not being good at this new thing enough, then we start to question ourselves in those situations where we could face all new things. We start to question all the potential new things that could come our way and how we're going to react and respond to that and what that means for us, what that starts to form us when it comes to our identity, how we respond to new information. Because what we are familiar with and what we know well, that's our comfort zone. When we start to move out of our comfort zone because we're faced with something new, insert that default reflex to reject something new because of the story of not being good enough, not being fast enough in digesting that new information, or picking up on the new talent or whatever it is. We talked about that reflex already. We start to push down something new and come back to our comfort zone and start to tell ourselves that story of, oh, I'm not good enough to digest this new information, to take on this new role as a part of my identity, or it doesn't align. It doesn't feel right for me, so I'm going to push it away instead of digesting it open-heartedly and letting it come out as it wants to. It's like we digest everything we put in our mouth. Why don't we digest everything that we see? Why do we push certain things away? We still need to digest and process information. And so that is an element of control, and this is where control-driven worries comes in. That desire to control everything that comes our way, every conversation, every situation, even controlling everyone else's perspectives and trying to make them ours, the same as ours, just so that we feel like we're not alone in the way we function, the way we think, the way we believe and process information in this life. But that control is all an illusion. We don't have control of everything that comes our way. Not everything. We don't have control of every conversation, every situation. And we certainly don't have control of other people's opinions, other people's perspectives and perceptions, much as we may try to sway or persuade them. So here's one thought I will leave you with as we come to the end of this video around control-driven worries, the last key link. Come back to your humanness. Wave that humility and humbleness wand around, that magic wand, because it will always conquer over superiority and superego when it rears its head. It will humble us. Come back to your humanness. Next week, we're going to go over somatic practice that takes us through the stomach, that region of the body, and it helps us to process new information, to digest, to facilitate that digestion of new information. But until then, I leave you with 3 questions that you can percolate in the meantime, starting with the first question. What am I currently overthinking? Over chewing in my mind. It's just like sitting there festering, What am I currently overthinking and over chewing in my mind that kind of stems from themes around imposter syndrome, inferiority, being worried of not being enough? And then we can also ask, where in life am I gripping to a certainty that really I can't control? And I know deep down I can't. Where am I gripping to a certainty in life that I know deep down it's not something I can control? And then number 3, probably the most confronting of the 3 questions. If I let go of everything that I know and everything that I title myself as right now that makes me, my identity, who am I at the core? What remains when I strip identity and superego? What remains? Who am I at the core when I let go of everything I know, everything I title myself as? Who am I? It's not my job title. It's not my role in the family household or dynamics. Who am I as a human being? I hope you enjoyed this stirring little video, and I will see you next week for the somatic practice on the stomach.